Well, today I got my glasses on because I'm going to be taking your questions about narcissism, about narcissistic abuse, about narcissist personality disorder. I want to look at everything that we're getting wrong about narcissists and why we end up why we end up not seeing the red flags. I know that that's one of the biggest questions I got is how could a psychologist who'd seen clients for over 20 years and in fact had a practice with narcissists not see a narcissist when I met him and got into a relationship? What blinds us to this group of people? In fact, I'm so excited for next week's podcast it's going to drop on Monday because I'm interviewing Dr. Erin Leonard. If you've not come across Dr. Erin Leonard, she actually wrote a new book called How to Outsmart a Narcissist. And she's going to get into how not only about attachment styles, but how emotional intelligence, your emotional intelligence, can be used against you. And I think that's something that most of us don't talk about is that there are vulnerabilities inherently in you being a super smart person and you being a very emotionally sophisticated person, that just because you have these skills and qualities doesn't necessarily make you immune or impervious to narcissists and narcissistic abuse. We often assume that because somebody that makes a great employee, because they're the person you want to move into next door, because maybe they're the person that you want to marry, that somehow, or even if they're a psychologist and you want to see them in the office, that somehow makes them like abuse proof, that somehow these qualities should work consistently across all circumstances in all situations, and then somehow prevent them from being abused. But that's actually not how it works. If the things that make you so good as an employee, the things that make you so powerful as a partner or as a friend, are the very things that people who are more narcissistic or with psychopathic tendencies are weaponizing and utilizing against you to your downfall. And so I really want to get into that because I think that we have this big misunderstanding that it's just simply a matter of boundaries, and that people who get into toxic relationships are across the board people pleasers, and because that they lack that skill of being able to spot that they're being overly compliant or they're sharing too much or they're over explaining, that somehow that's why they got into a toxic relationship. I want to let you know that you couldn't be more wrong. In fact, the more intelligent you are when it comes to emotions and your ability to sort of navigate complex situations also means you have some big Achilles heels. It's your kryptonite. The very thing that is your superpower is often your kryptonite. It certainly was for me. So let's get into that today about how narcissists, psychopaths, and sociopaths will weaponize the very things that make you so good at what you do, make you such a fantastic friend, make you the perfect partner, how they're going to weaponize that against you when they meet you. And I know I've already talked about how blind trust, blindly just assuming everybody's good and we live in a good world and we're all well intentioned, and that if we could just cooperate, we'll somehow get along. And by the way, that's what I believed. I actually thought that there was no need to have argument. If you meet a high functioning enough individual who could see reason, look at things like a Rubik's Cube from a different angle, that somehow we could come to some common understanding and that there wouldn't be any need for an argument. What I didn't know was that the person I met saw that about me and actually recognized that that was my vulnerability, that could be used against me in order to then convince me that maybe I wasn't seeing things from all the perspectives that I could, that maybe there were alternative ways in which I should have considered what was going on, so that could explain away what he was doing and pulling on me. Now, I only using gender specific just because in my case it was a guy, but I have met female narcissists who have really bamboozled men and bamboozled even their female partners. So I know that this is not a male thing. This has to do with a personality disorder. So I would love to hear the way in which you have been taken advantage of, maybe something that you didn't see until hindsight. Let's get into how this happens so that we can reduce our vulnerability and become more careful, more on top of it. The first one I want to talk about, and while I'm waiting for some of you guys to put in some questions, is your cognitive flexibility is a huge vulnerability. So what is cognitive flexibility? So cognitive flexibility is the it's the I want to say it again. I hate repeating myself because as a writer, you never do this when you're writing. You don't use the same word repeatedly, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's the ability to see things from different angles. So you may have heard the old adage, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. That's what it means. It's like, so you're approaching a problem and you're considering that you could do it from top down, you could do it from bottom up. Maybe you can even do something out of box, but you literally look at something and you think, oh, there's multiple ways that we could accomplish this. Like say, for example, you want to warm water up. You could consider like putting it on a stove and warming it on the stove. You could actually throw the container in the microwave and heating it that way. You could actually pour hot water out of a spigot until it warms the water up to the temperature you want. You're seeing it that there are multiple ways in which you could warm water up. Now, how is that a risk when it comes to engaging with a narcissist? Well, believe it or not, a narcissist knows that you're seeing it from multiple angles. So when they do something, say they lie about something or you caught them in something, they could actually then appeal to that maybe your perspective is the wrong perspective. Maybe there are other ways to consider what exactly they did. Like maybe it wasn't that they refused to show up to some event that you told them about. Maybe you did forget to tell them about the event. Or maybe you gave them the wrong address and they tried to go to the event, but they couldn't go because somehow they didn't have the proper instructions. You see how what I'm saying is that they take the fact that you know that nothing is simple, nothing is black and white, and things are complicated, and then they make these other proposal of possible other options of what could go wrong. And then because you're flexible and you see things from multiple angles, you're like, yeah, you're right. I maybe I did forget to tell you. For example, in Austin, there's this really great restaurant called Kirby Lane. There are more than one Kirby Lanes. This actually happened to us. My son said to us when my ex and I first moved into the area way back when I was in the middle of that relationship, they said, let's meet for brunch at Kirby Lane. Well, I didn't know that there are multiple locations. So I popped it in. Of course, it suggested the one that was closest to me. And I went there and realized that my sons were actually waiting in another one. See, that would be easy to say, oh, you know what? You didn't know that. That's why you didn't show up, or I wasn't there because I was at the other one and you were there. Now, anyone who's been in a relationship with a narcissist knows that's a bunch of hogwash. That the truth is, they weren't ever at that restaurant. They just proposed that as a way to hide so that they aren't being caught out as lying about the situation. But when you're an emotionally intelligent person, you that can see how that error can be made and that's a reasonable explanation, so you take it from that angle. So those are the types of things that toxic people, because here's the thing that we often don't understand about narcissists. We say like kind of a point blank, they lack empathy and they're not self-reflective and they don't have a strong conscience. And so what we often say, we assume when you hear that is that you're dealing with somebody who is emotionally like a brick, like a brick, dense. They just are not very sophisticated. You actually couldn't be further from the truth. They're not dense and they're not sophisticated. They're incredibly sophisticated. I remember talking to somebody, I think it was Dr. Gregory Lester, who was an expert on personality disorders, and he said that they use basic instincts, very predatory instincts. think of something that's like, think of a snake. It doesn't have much of a brain. It's mostly, the brain is a very like low level development. It's not very sophisticated, and yet how successful are they when it comes to hunting? Extremely so. And what do? They mesmerize, some of them, I'm thinking of the cobra, mesmerizes its prey before it consumes it. Well, how does it do that? Well, it understands how that prey moves and works and thinks. And so it's able to sort of anticipate that prey's actions and then gets ahead of it. And so when we assume by hearing that narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths, because they lack empathy and self-reflection, that somehow that means that they're not very good at this stuff, that they don't understand the more nuanced pieces of emotions and relationships. Oh, thank you so much for that gift. That's actually not true. You're stepping into one of the things they want you to think. They want you to assume that puts them at a disadvantage. But because of the predatory nature, the basic instincts are so sophisticatedly wired. They're thinking several steps ahead of you and already know where your vulnerabilities are and are going to weaponize those vulnerabilities against you. So just like a cobra is mesmerizing the rat in the room, the narcissist is mesmerizing us by knowing our vulnerabilities. And one of them is our strengths often are our vulnerabilities, the very things that makes you so good at what you do in the job and help you at the neighborhood association meetings, or maybe even makes you the fantastic candidate from some like school board, is the very thing that also is going to be a vulnerability when you get into these relationships. So please be aware that your flexibility of being able to see things from multiple angles, your self-awareness, the fact that you know that you're not the center of the world and that you're humble, the fact that you're a selfless person and that you know how to delay gratification and put other people's needs above your own, these are the very things they're going to then use against you. And here's another really big one they love to use against you. They know that it's uncomfortable to put you in an uncomfortable spot, that you don't like hurting other people, that you're sensitive enough to know the consequence of some of your actions. Like, for example, setting limits. We say to everybody, just get better at setting limits. The reason you're not protecting yourself is you just don't hold firm to the boundaries. But what we don't talk about is narcissists don't push big boundaries. They push little ones, like teeny little ones that you assume are sort of like civil, like just the nature of civil discourse, the nature of civil relationships and hospitality. That you assume, okay, so those of you who watched the 29-part series, and I know many of you over the weekend has watched it because I saw the comments come through. The comments got really active again. But one of the things that people got super frustrated with me about was, and for those who don't know my story, so one of the things that happened was my ex mom needed knee replacement surgery. Because she was using a public healthcare system in Mexico and had gotten a bad doctor, they had put the wrong size knee replacement, the wrong size or prosthetic in her knee, and it was causing an infection. I actually saw her knee on multiple occasions. It was red, hot, and swollen, and it was like over a year out from the surgery. So she'd sat with this wrong size, like piece of hardware in her body that didn't fit, and it had aggravated all the tissues and didn't really heal. Frankly, she'd never healed from that surgery, and it was angry and red and swollen. Now, we're talking over a year out from the original surgery, and anybody who knows anything about healthcare, and me as a psychologist who was raised with a nurse, my mom is a nurse, of course, really knew what this meant. This woman it wasn't going to be long. She already had an infection in her leg, obviously an infection in her leg. And it wasn't going to be long before it set in and became gangrene and possibly got into the bone. And what would happen then? Well, they're going to take her leg off. She's going to lose her leg over this. So my ex and I decided that we would bring her to our house because we lived, maybe, 15 hours away. So we put her on a plane, had all sorts of help get her to our home. And then we got to see one of the top specialists in the area who had worked with with soccer players. This guy had a huge expertise in blown out knees and, amazing medical record. And we got in to see him. And he said, yeah, I know exactly what's wrong. We have to go in, remove that part, clean it out of the infection, and then we're going to have to put a new piece in after the infection's completely gone. But he said the big hard piece here is getting rid of the infection. So the first part of the surgery which happened in May of 2018, is they removed the piece that didn't fit, the prosthetic that didn't fit, and then they started her on injectable antibiotics and a special diet. Her leg, of course, was immobilized in a wheelchair. A lot of you are like, how did she get around? How could she meet up and do stuff? Because she's in a wheelchair with her legs stuck out, immobilized in this really rigid kind of I don't even know how to describe it. It was think of like what you see for arms, only with went on the leg and it locked it into place. They said, you can't move this leg. There's nothing inside this knee. She cannot move this leg. So she was in this wheelchair bound, being immobilized, literally not allowed to move this leg. But it didn't mean she couldn't go out and do stuff. We did get out. It was hard, but we did do that. So while this was happening, he and I split up. And then was when I found out that he was really after the money and he wanted this big payout of money. But while we were trying to sort this out, I went ahead and made a transfer of funds to pay for the rest of the surgery because In Mexico, you pay ahead. It's not like there wasn't a healthcare system to cover this. There wasn't insurance, so it had to be paid out of pocket. So I paid what I thought it was going to cost. It actually cost more, but I transferred a large sum of money. Well, he started spending it. So he spent like over half of it. And then he came back and said, oh, I want to get back together. And I really missed you. Now, we all know that's not what was happening. What was happening was he looked at that bank account and said, oh, crap. I can't afford to pay for the surgery. I need Kerry back in my life. I got to stop this divorce proceedings because I'm hoping she will, like from some, vulnerable part of her, be willing to come up with more money that since I've spent it on wine, liquor, and women, that she would somehow do this. Okay, so what I did was, I knew this. It wasn't like I was dumb and didn't know this. I mean, I wasn't quite, I was still pretty naive at that point. It wasn't like I really knew that he's that conniving, but there's another part of me like, yeah, I think he's that conniving. But so I made it contingent that I would get half of the, see, what my problem was, I dumped all my assets into a company there, and he wanted half of it because he was co-owner, even though he contributed nothing. So I thought, okay, I will transfer the rest of the money he's missing for the surgery if he gives me full control of the company. But here's where my naivete and my intelligence, emotional intelligence, screwed me, big time screwed me. I thought because he agreed to it, he gave his word, then he would follow through on it. It's what I would have done. If you have high emotional intelligence and you say you're going to do something, you do it, right? Your word, your bond. So if you tell work, who has a big kind of like deadline, like, hey, so-and-so, you're going to plan to do this and turn this in on this date, you're going to do that. Like right now, I'm buying a house and closing on a house, and the title company says you're going to transfer the money. And I like, yes, I'm going to transfer the money. You assume that company is assuming I'm going to transfer the money, right? That's the assumption I made. The problem is that toxic people know this about us. They know there's this written way in which life works, that civil relationships work, that there's these assumptions that we make when we engage in this kind of stuff, and they are banking on it. And then they corner you, which a new term I'd never heard before, in what's called a sadistic bind. Have you heard of that term before? A sadistic bind. So here's what it is. So next time you get cornered into something where you think, crap, I lose here and I lose here, I don't like either option, they've put me in this very untenable situation, now you know what that's called. It's called a sadistic bind. And that is, I'm now stuck because I accidentally got back into the relationship, transferred the money, and now he's not following through in his piece to go to the attorneys to sign over the paperwork to make the company mine. He didn't do that. I assumed he would do that because that's what I would do. He didn't do that. So now I'm in this really bad spot of which I have to be either withdraw the money from his mom's care, which feels really crappy, or I have to confront him and force him, which all he has to do is say, okay, we go to court. That's simple. We go to court, and by law, the law's on my side, you're going to lose. So I'm in a no-win situation. And now, no-win situations could be anything from, all right, I think of the ones, for example, people get caught where they get caught doing something they shouldn't. They're on video, somebody has it, and they're emotionally blackmailing them. If you don't do what I want, I'm going to release this video on you. And you're like, you don't want either option. Or maybe it is, the subtle one that happens with daters is this. This is what people who are really toxic with dating will do. You'll say to them, you know what, I don't take phone calls after 10 p.m. They'll call 10:01. And they'll on purpose say this. Now, I didn't call too late, did I? Well, yeah, you did. You called way too many minutes late, because if you said you don't take calls after 10, it means you probably want to be off the phone by 10. So they're calling at least 20 minutes too late. But they'll say that, and you're in a position of saying, well, it's 10:01. Do I make a fuss over 10:01? I look really petty for saying, yeah, well, it's 1 minute over. Well, technically, yeah, it is 1 minute over. And this is what they're looking for. They're looking for you to then go ahead and give them that to then say, no, no, it's okay because you know you look petty for insuring 1001, when really you should. But on the other hand, if you do, you look really awful. But if you don't, you're losing and you've betrayed yourself. So they know that these are the situations that we get put in. That's a great example of a subtle example. That's a great example of a subtle example of a sadistic bind, that you know that no matter what you do, you're going to lose. Here's another one I had with a dater. This guy had been talking to me all week. I was in an area. You guys are going to laugh at how naive I was. And nowadays, I'm not that naive. I just didn't know bad people like this existed in the world. I really didn't know. So I had a guy that I was talking to. I was visiting New York City. I didn't know that when you go on traveling on like a dating app, that people know who know you're traveling, they somehow think that you want a one night stand, that you're just looking for a hookup. I had no clue about that. Because I thought, well, it's a chance to meet somebody in a new area with a new view of life, and maybe this person's interested in moving. Maybe they think I'm interested in moving. I never assumed that it was just a casual thing, that they think that's code for casual. I didn't know that. Anyway, I've been talking to this guy for a week, made it clear of the limits of the relationship that I was looking for, that I was looking for something serious. He mentions that he'd had like surgery. He'd had surgery of some kind. But he didn't tell me anything else of how it impacted his life. I didn't know it had like basically made him nearly like immobile, and that he needed assistance. He was mobily restricted. I didn't know that. He probably gained a tremendous amount of weight. And I didn't know that either. So he didn't look like, in other words, he didn't look like his pictures. Okay. So he shows up at the date, is dropped off by a taxi that's going to pick him up sometime. He didn't even make his reservation of when he's going to go back, which, like, ding, 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 right there. I should have met him at the door, flipped the little guys around on his tail and said, out, because you didn't even make a pickup time. You're assuming it's open-ended. No, it's not open-ended. This is already over with. But I didn't know that. So he says, the first thing he says out of his mouth is, he said, is how I look surprise you? Okay, yeah, actually, yeah, because it's surprising me because you don't look anything like your photos. And you know that, which is why you're asking me. And see, that's another example of a sadistic bind. That's where your emotional intelligence, where your sensitivity, your self-awareness, your empathy, all the things that make you a nice person, they're using that niceness against you in that moment, putting you in a spot to where you're stuck between lying and being truthful. If you're truthful and say, yeah, no, you don't look anything in your photos, you're actually quite disgusting, you look like a B word. But if you swallow it and say, oh, no, you look great, well, now you're in a bind because you're lying. And they now know that you're vulnerable because you're willing to like sacrifice, fall on your own sword to protect their feelings around something they already know they're disingenuous about. They know they're lying about. They know they've put you in this nasty bind. And so those are examples of how like boundaries are really tough with toxic people, and that's how our emotional intelligence really puts us in bad spots with people, because they're counting on your niceness, not just you being nice. They're counting on your sensitivity. Let's really get honest here, because it's easy to tell everybody, just stop being nice. It's just be kind, but don't be nice. But it isn't about just being nice. It's about the fact that it hurts you to hurt other people. And they're counting on that. They're counting on the fact that you have this intuitiveness and this concern and sensitivity to the feelings of other people. And they're using those things to put you specifically into a situation in which they're going to use it against you. Some of you guys are sharing with me, and I love it. Thank you guys. You're sharing with me other code words that are nasty code words. I don't know if you guys ever follow. I know I don't always plug other creators, and I should, but I have been having so much fun with Jenny Young. It's burn the haystack method. So if anybody's out there and you're a woman and you want to like get really good at all this code words that men, now granted, Jenny's talking about what men do on dating apps. I'm not saying women don't do them on dating apps. I'm sure they do. But all these code words like, I'm a very affectionate person, or touch is my love language, or Netflix and chill, as somebody just said, or just want to have fun, all these code words that, or, I'm a very fit person and I want someone to take my life, my life choices just as seriously as they do, like all these ways in which we try to give around saying things that we know that are not cool to say, we try to say in really nice ways. Um, yeah, Rachel said, I'm not surprised by how many people, you would be surprised by how many people misrepresent them. No, I'm not surprised by how many people misrepresent themselves. I'm particularly on dating apps these days, which is why I'm not on them, because I know most people these days are not very honest. You get on them long enough and you run through enough of it, you sort of, her name is Jenny Young, and you can find her on Instagram this way. Okay, she's an English professor with a PhD, and it's in critical discourse. So she looks at rhetorical, like rhetoric. She's looking at rhetoric. So if you want to find her on Instagram, and I don't know if she's on TikTok or not, and I don't know if she's on YouTube, but look for worst case scenario. I'm sorry, word case scenario. You know how you say worst case scenario? It's not worst, it's word case scenario. So look for word case scenario. Thank you. I wash my wigs only about once a month, and I've been trying this new strategy of like the silicone shampoo, and then yeah, because wigs are really hard. This is the actual human hair, but it dries out, and if I'm not careful, it will really, because if you don't realize it, your scalp is always putting out oil, and so these wigs aren't getting oil like that. So I have to like do this regimen to bring oil into them so that they don't dry out. So yeah, I styled this a little differently than I normally did, and I really like it. It turned out great. So I got to remember what I did so I can do it. I can do it again the next time. Yeah, no, I had a massive hair loss after my third baby. I probably lost more than 50% of my hair. So these days, in fact, if you read my story, Love You More, you learn really quickly that was one of the ways in which my ex weaponized my vulnerabilities against me. And one of them was he really used my baldness against me as a way to sort of keep me vulnerable, insecure, controlled. It was really kind of sick. So one of the ways in which yeah, Gail, it was very traumatic when I was only in my late 20s or 30s when it happened. So here I am in my 30s, having this massive hair shed, and I was devastated. About 10 years. It was highly traumatic. I had nightmares. That was how much PTSD symptoms I had. That is, I didn't really care if I lived, and I had nightmares on a regular basis. Stopped going out, stopped going into public. It was terrible. So when my husband passed away, when Brad died, I thought, you know what? I'm just gonna like bite the bullet and get into wigs and embrace that lifestyle. But it's hard. Making that transition is not easy. And it's a big learning curve to learn how to take care of wigs, what goes into that, what's even a good wig, like what is, I mean, it's technical. It's very technical. So I found some good instructors. One of them is Scarlett. Oh, I'm trying to remember Scarlett's name on Instagram. But another one I really love is Denise Sheets. Denise Sheets on YouTube. She has Hey Wig Sister on Instagram. Her profile has been a lifesaver to me. Really, really a lifesaver. And that I've recently, about 9 months ago, I bought my first human hair wig. This is the first one I bought. And I really, really love it. But it's like I said, it's a huge investment, and there's a big learning curve to learning how to take care of it. But one of the things I decided when I got out of that toxic relationship was because he made such a big deal out of my wigs and my hair loss, and that it was such a secret. He wanted to be a secret thing. It was weird. What he did was weird. It felt like a fetish, honestly. It just felt sick. So I decided when I got done that I would tell the world that I was bald. So these days I don't keep it a secret. I tell everybody who asks, or even somebody like, "Oh, I love your hair." I'll say, "Yeah, it's a wig." I feel like because it takes control back from him. And that's one of the things I really want to encourage all of you. I want to encourage you guys. You know where the spots is that your toxic person hit you hard. Maybe it was how you parented, or maybe it was around how you ran the house, or maybe it was how you scheduled your life, or maybe it was your career. I don't know, something. There's something that probably toxic people tend to smell out where we're most vulnerable. And for me, it's my self-image. I've always been a big girl. I'm tall. I have large hands. My ring size is a 10. I have size 10 feet. And I've never been a petite woman. Never, not ever. Even with my thinnest, which I'm definitely not that, but even my thinnest, I've never been a small woman. And I'm 5'7". I'm almost 5'7.5". And would you believe in my family, I'm the smallest of all the women. I'm the smallest. We're big. Our family is just like, I always say we're peasant stock. And he knew that. He knew that I was really insecure about that. And so that was what he just worked and needled me on to make me feel super crappy and very insecure. And of course, being balding, losing hair on top of it, yeah, how more devastating. So if you're not a thin woman and then you've lost your hair too, shit, you just have like everything working against you, it feels like. Anyway, he knew that. And that was one of the ways in which I thought, I'm not hiding anymore. I'm really not going to hide that. So yeah, like someone just shared that they know someone who makes fun of this woman for having dyslexia. I'm so glad that I didn't know that I was autistic in that relationship. That's another vulnerability I have. I'm autistic. A lot of you may have noticed how like gullible I seemed, just because I see the world very literally. Autistic people tend to take things at face value, and we are face value. What you see with me is what you get. This is not a brand you're experiencing with me. This is me. So I don't do duplicity very well. I don't do like falsehood very well or masking very well. So yeah, I didn't think people did that because it's uncomfortable. Duplicity and lying for me as an autistic woman it's physically painful to lie. So I'll just be upfront. So I'm sure I was a dream for my mom and dad to raise. In fact, I didn't need a curfew. I didn't need rules. I never pushed the rules with my mom and dad ever, not ever. I was so good and did mostly the right things most of the time, to the point that my friends' parents would say to my friends, "Is Kerry going on this trip? Because if Kerry's going, you can go." I'm not. My friends hated me for that. They're like, "Seriously, Kerry, we get asked, is Kerry going to this concert down in Detroit? Because if she's going, you can go." And they're like, "No, she's not going." Well, then you can't go either. They'd say, "Has Kerry been invited to this party?" Well, no, Kerry's not been. Well, then you can't go either. I mean, I'd never asked for that to be some plumb line out there for the public, but that's how good that I was. I always like colored inside the lines. But unfortunately, that naivete made me blind to the fact that there were really evil people, and there were people who found it enjoyable breaking these rules. Frankly, they were willing to do it, and that doesn't bother them to do that. Lying doesn't bother them. I didn't know that. That was to me all like completely like news to me. I had no idea that existed. So yeah, I know a lot of you are like, seriously, where did you get your PhD? And that's another bias that people tend to have, is that somehow, just because you're a psychologist and you can see it in the office, that when it comes to your own life and your own feelings and your own insights, that you should be able to see that too. Well, psychologists aren't their own therapists. We don't interpret our own dreams. We need outside help to do that, and that's the same for everybody. So somehow it doesn't just somehow like transfer that you have this omniscient perspective of the world. Okay, so I know I'm getting a little off track, but not in a way, not, because that's how my intelligence and my emotional intelligence was definitely used against me. Yeah, honesty is the best policy with normal people, but you're right. It does not. We don't. Here's one of the things I really want you to get better at, that I'm really doing. This is one of the things I'm doing to get around my emotional intelligence, that because this is what we get wrong about narcissists. I want you to start asking yourself, what could be the ulterior motive to do this? Okay? What could be the ulterior motive? Just, there's nothing wrong with entertaining that question. I had once this is, again, I'm giving you a lot of date stories, but this is the easiest place for me to pull it from. I had a date who asked me what I was wearing to the date, his first date. And then he said, "Could you wear a dress?" Okay, now, any woman in the audience, and all men in the audience, you already know where that's going to go, right? What could go wrong with me wearing a dress? Well, a lot. A lot could go wrong. I absolutely did not wear a dress. I wore slacks. Absolutely. But ask yourself that. Like, your friend wants to host a party and your friend never hosts the party, and suddenly this friend always has to be the center of attention. Ask yourself, why is this friend offering to host a party and they never usually offer to do that? What might be the advantage of them doing this for me this way? It's a really great way for us to see behind it. Yeah, somebody just said, when I see him, he's begging and pleading. He's also acts like he's grieving the relationship. So, Miss Raina, I want you to ask yourself, what could be his ulterior motive for begging and pleading? I can already tell you what it is. See, we assume that narcissists want the relationship for the same way that you want it. We assume that. They don't. Narcissists, sociopaths, and psychopaths see relationships as transactional. So, what might he be losing by losing the connection with you? Well, probably the stability that you bring, probably the way in which you make his life better when you're in it. Probably there's connections he's going to lose when he loses you. Probably he doesn't have all his money lined up yet. So losing you means he loses like that financial stability. Exactly. He's losing a lot, or I'm assuming it's a he because you're miss. Maybe it's a woman, but I'm assuming it's a man. But be really careful and ask yourself, what could be the ulterior motive for this person doing what they're doing? And I know, here's another way in which I think our emotional intelligence gets really used against us. We want to assume good things about people. We want to like, that just feels cruel. Isn't that paranoid for me to think that people could possibly take an angle like that? No, actually, it's pretty savvy. Paranoid, here's what paranoid is. So paranoid technically is when you see that there's something around every corner. Literally, you anticipate there's somebody's out to get you on everything. But they're not. It's not paranoid to assume that people with a track record who have an ulterior motive often may be out to get you. That's actually just savvy. That's not paranoid. That's just being very savvy. Here is a great example. I'll never forget it. This happened way back when I got fresh out of college. One of my first work experiences was I worked at a psychiatric facility that was one step up from the state hospital. So in those days, and this was like in the early 1980s, before Prozac, okay? This is before Prozac. I got to see what treatment was like before Prozac. Fascinating. It was really hard to treat depression back then, very hard. And a lot of people suffered with depression for a very long time. That's a discussion for another time. Okay, we had a client that was hospitalized who was psychotic. He had schizophrenia. And he'd been in there for a while, and they'd pat him on the medications for psychosis, and all of his hallucinations and delusions went away except for one. He kept saying somebody was out trying to hurt him. Somebody was out to had it out for him, and that he was in danger. And like the psychiatrist kept saying, that's not possible. There's no hit. This person kept saying there's hit on him. Somebody had a hit on him. No, there's no hit on him. This is just some guy off the street who, is a little, he often didn't always have a home. He kind of lived, he's a transient person, kind of transient lifestyle. And probably also using medications, illegally in the way he shouldn't have been. But we finally ran out of his stay, the length of stay he could stay, and we had to discharge him. But they had that one symptom we couldn't seem to get rid of. He just kept saying somebody was after him. Do you know what? A few weeks after he got released, it was in the newspaper, I kid you not, in the newspaper, that this guy had been in with some very dangerous people, and something had gone wrong, and they actually had taken a hit out on him. He was right. He was right all along. Exactly what he said was the truth, that somebody had been out on him. So just because you feel paranoid for being suspicious and questioning doesn't mean you're paranoid. It means you may be accurate. It may be the person in your life does have some new angle. I'm thinking back of Miss Raina about all this pleading and drama. We assume, because if you're a healthy person and you go to your friend and you say, hey, or your partner, hey, I really blew it. I really want a second chance. I am deeply sorry for what I did. I shouldn't have done whatever it was that I did. I did a really grave bad thing. What will you do? Ask yourself this. What would you do to make it right with that person? You would go to every length that you could to prove that you weren't going to do this again. You would, on your own, go out and get your own help because you're mortified that you would have done something like that and you don't ever want to be guilty of that again. You would go above and beyond to reassure your partner that they could trust that you're doing the work that you need to do. And then when your partner had a meltdown or fear or feel anxious or betrayed, you would go above and beyond to give space for that feeling, to allow them to work through those feelings. You would do all this work to create safety for them again. Now, what does a toxic person do? What steps do they take to ensure that your peace of mind, that you have peace of mind? What steps do they go above and beyond to create safety and security for you after that? I'll bet you they're resentful. I'll bet you they make all sorts of promises, but the minute they're out of your sight, they're back to the ways that they were before. I bet it only lasts for a few days, a few weeks at the most. I bet they can't stand every time that you get emotional or upset or triggered by it. And I'll bet you that even you bringing it up in their minds is one too many times, and you can't seem to let go of anything, and you're gaslighting you and really attacking you for it. That's what happens in these relationships. And that's how our emotional intelligence gets used against us. Because we then give them the benefit of the doubt. We assume they're going to approach this the way that we would. And then when they have pain or have a reaction, we then also go above and beyond because we're sensitive, compassionate people to try to understand why they're acting that way instead of seeing it from our perspective and saying, you know what? That's not what I would do. And that's not what a healthy, loving person would do. This is actually manipulative and exploitative. We don't say that. We don't think that because it feels, and this is the part, I have a feeling if you guys are like me, this is probably one of the things that really got you, is that it feels mean not to give them the same benefit of the doubt that you wish they'd give you. Am I right? Does that feel really cruel? Unfortunately, they don't give you the same benefit of the doubt. They've never given you that benefit of the doubt. And everything is always predatory. It is always exploitative. It is always manipulative. It is always deceptive, unfortunately. Even in the hero type, one of the things I haven't done in a long time is I haven't gone over the subtypes of a narcissist. There are at least 5 different subtypes. And there are some subtypes that really do wish good things. They look like they're doing good things for other people. They look like they're humanitarian, but they're not. They're not humanitarian because everything they do, it is self-oriented, what they get out of it. They're very preoccupied with curating a good profile or a good image. So they do these things not because they feel compassion for broken human beings, but because they really like the way that it looks good on them. But they look like they're this most giving, most amazing people. So I need to, maybe that's what we'll get into next week, because I have the topics of this the topic for next week is very close to this week, and maybe we'll get into more of that about attachment styles of narcissists as well as subtypes of narcissists. So that's a great question, Jess Kerry. You're asking, do they really believe that we're that awful and they really believe that we deserve it? I think they believe that you're like them. They really believe that you're similar to them. And so as a result of that, then they think that the things that you're doing was for the same reasons that they would do it. For example, that's why they don't like your emotions. That when you break down and cry and get really upset, they assume it's for manipulative reasons because that's why they get upset and cry. When I realized that a lot of what I saw was for show, I was shocked. I was shocked at how much it was because my ex at one point had what looked like a full-on panic attack. And he told me he was afraid I was going to reject him. And he was like, I'm serious. He was curled up in a fetal ball, sweating massively, near tears, shaking uncontrollably. And now I look back and okay, I'm not for sure that was real, but I don't know how he pulled. And if it wasn't real, he deserves an Oscar award for that. That was an amazing performance I had ever seen from a human being. Because me as a psychologist, that looked authentic. I mean, I thought the guy was really having a panic attack. Maybe he was, but he lied about the reason. I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but what I'm saying, so please hear me on this. They're so good at this that it just feels very authentic, and that's where they get past us. But here's what I should have paid attention to. It ran through my mind at that time that this was unusual and odd, and I struggled with it. There was something about it that I struggled with about it. Hey, Super Sloth, I'm so glad to see you. Yeah, thanks, Louise, for letting me know your new handle. I appreciate that. Because I had a moment of question ran through my mind about this, it just felt weird. It's not something I would have a panic attack, nor would I have made my panic attack that obvious. I would have felt more, that's what it was. I'll tell you what bothered me. Something bothered me, and it was just now talking about it out loud with you all, and I put it together. What bothered me was the willing of being so public with it. I have had panic attacks. I never want anyone to know that I'm having them. They're horrible. I go off and hide in some corner, even if it's in a public place. I go find some corner to hide in because I don't want anybody seeing it, because I feel deeply ashamed. So, why is this person making a big deal out of it? Why is he doing this in front of me and having this literal, like, I'm talking, this guy was near 50 years old. Why would a nearly 50-year-old man be sweating bullets in a fetal position, near weeping, having this? This just made no sense. And I've had panic attacks. And now I know why. Because that's not the way he conducted it was not consistent with the way most anxious people have panic attacks. So although it looked real, everything about it seemed real, his nonchalant kind of acceptance of being so public didn't fit, because that's not how I experienced it, or anybody I've ever known experienced it. I've had clients who can barely tell me in the office that they have panic attacks. They just can't even go there. They don't want me to be aware of it. They feel so much shame about that. So that's what, now I know what fell off. So be careful about that, because they can emote with what feels like real emotion and real pain, but something will be a little odd, like not quite okay, and we'll just find it a little strange. That's what should be your cue. There's something disingenuous about this. And that's what I felt it in the moment, but I couldn't put words to it. So in your experience, is it realistic to have a relationship with a parent who has a toxic or narcissistic spouse? The spouse doesn't seem to have any interest in having a relationship with us. So Cam, that's a great question. What you are essentially asking, I'm going to rephrase it in a new way. You're saying, is it realistic to have a relationship with somebody who's in a toxic relationship? And what might be the risks to you? Well, I think does that make it easier to kind of begin to see what some of the, I would say, yeah, it's not a problem, but be aware of the limitations. This person's going to be controlled by the other individual. There may be ways in which you're not going to be able to really truly engage with them in ways that would be good or comfortable. You may end up at times being a coach or a support person for this person. That's actually a great thing. Great for them, maybe not so good for you. But I don't think there's any risk of you being harmed by the toxic individual indirectly, but I do think it's going to definitely impact the quality of your relationship for sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah, it really depends if they're enabling the toxic partner to be toxic towards the child. That's a good point too. I really appreciate that, Louise. There's no point in trying to maintain a relationship with a toxic, abusive person. Yeah, I've really had enough. I agree. I agree that it's really tough with it. Yeah, I hope that helps. So what other kind of questions do you have about what you might be getting wrong about narcissists? I guess one of the big things I want to summarize from today's discussion is that be really careful in your interactions with everybody. Be really careful that you can see around the angles of this, what might be other reasons why people do what they do. What might be other motives and benefits they're getting off of whatever they're doing. Be careful in your assumption that everybody's a good person, because not everybody is a good person. And be really careful in the trust that you give to people. Make sure they've earned it, and that they're vulnerable too, and that they're vulnerable in similar ways. Because one of the other things that throws us off about toxic people is in the beginning, they do share very vulnerable things, but it's purposefully vulnerable and being purposefully shared. You know, what my ex told me on the first date that he had been sexually abused. Now, think about that. How many men do you know that would say that on a first date? I don't know of any guy who would ever do that. That's odd. That's odd. So be careful when someone trots out history that just doesn't feel fitting for the timing. It doesn't feel fitting for the circumstances. It doesn't feel fitting for the gender roles, right or wrong. I'm not saying gender roles are right. I'm just saying it's just not something that men do. Now, for a woman, it might look like something. Watch out for men. If you're a guy in the audience, I think one of the things men should get better at watching out for is helpless behavior. When you have a woman who acts like she doesn't know how to change the oil in her car, and she's living as a single woman for several years, that makes no sense. That makes no sense, guys. Of course she knows how to change the oil in her car. She's just pretending she doesn't, because she's been the car's engine would have seized by now if that was true. She does know that. So be really, be careful about how you're being played up and flattery and this like learned this kind of female helplessness. A lot of female helplessness is just an act. I'll let you guys know. And women, among women, we look at each other like, yeah, and roll our eyes like, yeah, we believe that one. We don't. We know what that is. Exactly. You take it to the Jiffy Lube. Exactly. I also agree, Cam, that oversharing early on is another big common sign. Also, watch out for the way that they dominate relationships, and they're the expert on everything. No, they're not. Nobody's the expert on everything. Yeah, they definitely are. They're going to share trauma with you as a way to create the trauma bond, to give you this sense of this shared community that you two belong to, survivors together. I'm going to also let me tell you a hard truth, a really hard truth. I got this from Dr. Romney, but I already knew it ahead of that. It wasn't new information to me. And this is one of the things that I apply nowadays all the time. Of every victim that you meet, nearly 25% of them will have some personality disorder traits. Upward to 25% of every victim you meet is going to may have some personality disorder traits. That it's just because they get into a toxic relationship doesn't mean they don't have toxic qualities. A portion of the population do. Now, the majority don't. See, that's the other big wrong assumption that we're making. We make the assumption that you have to had to been over compliant, a people pleaser, codependent to get into a toxic relationship. No, actually, you don't. I mean, I can think of matchups right now that I know that's between two narcissists. Narcissists can fall in love with other narcissists. So just be really careful about that. When you get to meet somebody, be careful about who it is. Watch how is their life unfolded. How well are they handling other relationships? How well are they doing at work? What's their work history? How well do they show up and keep commitments? And when they get upset, how well do they manage their emotions? Are they able to modulate them and do something healthy with them? I'm reading through you guys' comments on that. You said this doesn't surprise me. Yeah, I'm glad it doesn't surprise you. Okay, so somebody asked, what's the line between emotionally immature and narcissism? Oh, that's an easy one. It's a degree, matter of degrees. That's all. So what I'm saying is that it starts out like you're kind of like a little insecure, and then you're a little more insecure, and then you're kind of preoccupied with yourself and selfish, and then you're sort of like everything's about you, and then everything's always about you. So you see what I'm saying? It's just a level of degrees. So somebody says, I don't think that's what she meant. So Louise, I'm going to go back and find what that person said, if I can find them. That's wild take. You get into a situation, you stay. You get into a situation and stay, you have those problems. Nope, that's actually not what I meant. I didn't mean that. I'm not saying it's narcissistic fleas. That's what you're saying. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that unhealthy people can get into relationships with unhealthy people, so that you could be already having problems and then match with somebody else who's already having problems. That's what I'm saying. I'm not, yes, I do agree that staying long terms with somebody, it can rub off on us. I mean, I certainly saw that with myself in 3 years I was around this guy. I started to want to gaslight him too. You know, I felt like, let's give him a little bit of dose of his medicine, see how well he likes it. Let's stonewall him to see how well that goes over. I'll tell you how it goes over. It doesn't. They don't care. See, the problem we have from the get-go in all of these relationships is you're more invested. They're not that invested. The most invested person in the relationship is the one that loses and the one that has the least power. They've never been emotionally they've never been emotionally attached to you. They've always been rather detached from you. That's why they're able to take all these risks with you. That's why they're willing to betray you. That's why they're willing to lie to you, because they, at a core level, don't care that they're hurting and harming you. They're very self-motivated. So they're already like one step out all the time. The fact that you're doing it because you're so emotionally invested, you're so fused that you're hoping that the pain you feel, they'll feel. No, they won't. They've never felt that pain. That's why they're willing to do what they do, which is really, I know, hard to get it was hard for me to wrap my mind around it at the time. What I got wrong was I listened to my pastors that said God could heal my sociopathic wife, and they backtracked and said, oh, sorry, that's actually very rare. God doesn't heal the unrepentant. That's true, Mark. I agree. I think the church, unfortunately, has been very blind to these psychological issues and problems, and they tend to focus on the victim, and they don't put the focus on the betrayer or the perpetrator. And you know what? I don't even know why. It's what they don't say out loud. They're going to the victim because they know the victim tends to be the one who's more accountable, more responsible, more emotionally intelligent. And as a result, they're hoping the victim will change and make accommodations to keep the relationship together. They're more concerned about your relationship being a marriage and staying married than they're concerned about your well-being in that relationship. And that is just back-ass word. It really is. We also have to stop coddling and placating and kowtowing and indulging toxic people in the church just because they don't like the word no, which is really what's happening. Is we don't go to the person who's doing the bad thing and says stop, because we already know they'll look at us and say, I don't care, who cares? I'm doing it anyway. So instead they go to the other person and say, you need to be tolerant and you need to make this work. We need to stop doing that. And we need to stop making it the victim's fault for their partner not being a better person or doing the right things. So how do you know someone's enabler versus a covert narcissist? Ooh, talk about a big question, Cam. Boy, you know how to really ask them. If they're indirectly participating in the abuse versus refusing to help because they're fearful. Yeah, that's a good question. They do look a lot alike. I would say self-reflection. I would measure the degree they're self-reflective. A covert narcissist will appear self-reflective, but actually is not. So what do I mean by that? So if you said to them, you know, that could look like collusion. The fact that you're putting up with this, that could be a form of collusion. A self-reflective person who's like an enabler may say, oh, you're right, but I'm scared. I don't know how to stand up to this person. I think a covert narcissist would become defensive and start to gaslight you and feel attacked. Would they? I think they would experience that as like a narcissistic wound and go after you for that. So I think it comes in. You measure their action and see whether it's looks like somebody who has the capacity to be empathic, emotionally aware, self-aware, somebody who has some self-reflection. I would measure that. That's what I would do. You're going to find that a covert narcissist they can't hear it. They literally can't hear it, and they just will defend and go after, really like fight you on it. I think they'll fight you a lot on it, and then they'll explain why it has to be the way that way it is. But yeah, that's a good question, and we have to see, that's the other thing we have to watch out for is these things are subtle. They're not, and we act like picking up narcissistic people is an easy thing to do. That even picking up love bombing. I know relationships, by the way, of people who've met and just had such simpatico that they know they want to get married really fast. I mean, Brad and I knew within 1 month that I wanted to marry Brad, but he's not a narcissist. And you could say that there was no love bombing, by the way. It was really good. What we had was just really good. But love bombing, on the other hand, is just over the top, too good to be, too romantic, too perfect, just shows up with too much. The difference is that Brad really listened to me and cared about what I had to say, and we had a blast and wanted to be with me. He really wanted to be with me, and he made the effort and showed up. On the other hand, my ex, he only showed up when it was convenient for him, but when he did show up, he'd show up with flowers, and he made sure it was an incredible experience. So it was like the quality of the relationship was really different. The emotional depth of the relationship was really different, but I didn't think to look at that. I just saw the romantic gestures and somehow thought that there was a lot of thought in it, not realizing it was a form of manipulation instead of this person was, actually it was, he was using it as a distraction, truthfully. Whereas, Brad never did anything romantic. He just wasn't a romantic person. There was no gifts, no flowers, but he couldn't wait to be with me, just really loved being with me. So those are the things we got to get better at paying attention to, honestly. So just not one narcissist type have I experienced. There's each person's own psychology is shaped by reacting and acting. I agree with you. There are kind of like big subtypes, but every person is their own person. And you're right. You're going to see all sorts of flavors of it. It's going to vary from person to person. And I do agree with you, user, that too much is just too much. So watch out for this. Again, if you go back to what I said earlier today, was ask yourself what could be the possible benefit of this behavior. If you really could ask yourself that, you can see through a lot of this. What might be what's called secondary gains here? Somebody, back to your question, Cam, how do you tell the difference between an enabler and covert narcissist? Well, Cynthia offered something on Facebook. She said, confront a covert, and you're going to pay. So if you confront them, you're going to pay. I agree. They're going to view that as a narcissistic wound, and there will be payment for that, definitely. All right, guys, this was an amazing discussion. Let's pick it up next week. I want to pick it up and answer some of the questions I didn't today, like, is it possible to get through to a narcissist? Vanilla Jan, that's a great question. Let's talk about it next week at Tuesday at 5 o'clock. I also want to talk more about the subtypes and how to identify them, particularly the tougher ones like the vulnerable, which is a covert narcissist, as well as the hero type. It's very hard to pick up on the hero type as well. So let's break them down and look at them. The trick is going to be in the template is the same. It's just the manifestation is different. If you can kind of think of it that way. Template's the same, but just like if you were to look at all the templates of a whatever, like a form of a letter, the salutation, the opening, the body, the template's the same, but the presentations are different. So let's get into how that looks across the board of all these subtypes next week. I can't wait to join you next week at Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. And thank you so much for hanging out with me today. It was a lot of fun. This was a really great discussion today. Great questions. I really appreciate it. All right, you guys, take care. I'll see you next week.